Hi, this is Thomas Elblom. This screencast is about Sitecore Application Lifecycle Management. The talk is about trying to optimize the different processes of Sitecore application development and trying to outline a strategy for how to move forward on implementing a complete application lifecycle management flow in your development process. So, what is application lifecycle management? Well, this is a definition. This is like, I guess it's just a regular definition of the application lifecycle management process. So it's about integrating, coordinating, and managing different phases of the process. So all the way from development to deployment, all the processes, and trying to find tools that optimize this process. But it's not only about that, it's also about monitoring and controlling each of the steps and each of the processes. So why is this important in the Sitecore world? Well, as we know, developing on Sitecore can be really simple. You could just be one developer running off your local machine, doing doing running off a database on your own machine, the Visual Studio, the IIS, everything on a single machine. But the reality of things is that we're all part of a team trying to develop solutions, and of course we have to work on versioned software, so we might have a version control system in place, and trying to share code and changes between developers is one process that's regularly seen on all development teams. So another process is of course deploying the code onto production. So moving not only the code but also the configuration, the databases, configuring the production server and all that stuff. And of course, Sitecore environments can scale, so we'll have SQL servers, we'll have content management servers, CMs, content delivery servers, CDs. We might have UAT and testing environments, so we need to maintain configuration across the different environments as part of the process as well. So we might need to do deployment to integration environments where we can test third-party integrations like SharePoint or any other third-party systems that integrates. And these systems might have different or we might implement continuous integration on those so that we can continually test as we're changing things, that we don't break things in the integrations. Um, we might have multiple versions of the integration environment. So we have if we have three different third-party systems that we're integrating with, these systems could be testing against or have different release cycles than the website. So we need to make sure that the people doing the integration work on or doing the work on the third-party systems have running versions of the software that don't break continually. So we need a safe branching strategy to be able to maintain different versions. And of course, maintaining different versions means that we need to make sure that hotfixes and patches on specific versions. So we need to be able to version not only code but also databases, the dependencies between the different versions. So if we're running a release in production and we're doing a new major release, version 2, then some of the changes happening in integration might need us to do a intermediate patch or hotfix on version 1 while still running on the development process in version 2. And of course, upgrading third-party dependencies while still being on track of the major development process. And all in all, this leads down to what is known as like agile development, continuous deployment, so that we can keep track and do regular deployments with ease, and we can make small changes that go through all the development processes and all the testing processes and onto production relatively fast. So this is application lifecycle management. This is the entire flow from one developer developing on a single machine to versioning, to release management, to hot fixes, to dependency checking, to configuration management, to deployment processes, to testing and all that stuff. So all in all, it's about focusing on optimizing the processes, focusing what's important in the processes, not necessarily optimizing the most difficult process, but maybe the most frequently done process. Choosing the tools to optimize and do the right work at the right time, and of course supporting distributed and simultaneous teams working on different parts of the product. And of course that's the process part. Then there's the quality part, optimizing and automating, decreasing chances of errors, improve testing possibilities and by automating things, and traceability, being able to reproduce environments and recreate problems in any versions at any time. So, how do we get started on Sitecore Application Lifecycle Management? First of all, we really need to understand what a Sitecore solution is and what it consists of. So all the moving parts in the solution. We need to understand the complete application lifecycle before starting. One part of this is trying to understand how the different processes in the complete lifecycle affects each other. So how deployment actually affects how you do your daily development job and things like that. And then focus on automation and optimizing, and focus on which processes to automate and optimize. Another way of getting started is to try to focus on the processes you have already. How can you actually optimize them? So instead of introducing new things because there's nice tools or it sounds cool, then try to focus on optimizing what you're doing already. And then when that's optimized, then you introduce new quality assurance steps or whatever kind of steps you want, automated steps. One way of getting started, and which is quite essential, is to try to focus on the frequently repeated processes. And as I mentioned before, not necessarily the most complex ones, which is another way of saying going for that quick win, changing what matters, not necessarily changing the most complex parts of the process. And this is quite essential for all the techies out there. This is not about introducing tools, it's about changing processes. We're all really fond of tools. We really like those cool buttons that does everything magically for us. But this is, if you don't understand the processes, if you don't have an overview of all the processes, introducing new tools will only just make the development process more complex. So this is about processes, understanding processes and optimizing the processes, not about introducing tools. So let's get down to looking at the actual life cycle and how we can move forward on that. So first of all, we'll go through the different components. Then we'll try to match those components onto the server roles. So understanding how the different components of the solution fits onto servers and the different parts of a solution. Then we'll look at the processes. And then finally, we'll match the components and the processes together and try to look at some examples of how life cycles can be can actually be handled using in the Sitecore development flow. One important thing to keep in mind during this presentation is that we're not going to focus on all of them. There are parts or processes that I'm not going to touch on. One of them is, for example, testing, unit testing, project management, issue management is not covered in this. So keep in mind that this is just part of the development, or it's focusing mainly on the development lifecycle, not the complete project lifecycle or application lifecycle. But the strategy that I'm outlining here fits well with the other processes as well. Um, Also, keep in mind that application lifecycle management is really it's not a one size fits all solution. So what you need to do is sit down and look at your company or team's needs, and then try to apply your own tools and processes onto it. So the components of a Sitecore solution. Any running Sitecore solution really consists of three overall parts. One is the underlying environment, one is the files, and another is the items. So if we look at the environment, we'll go through each of them. The environment in turn consists of three different parts. One is the server, the services, and the configuration. So the server is really about the hardware. So this is the hardware, the virtual machine, the operating system, all the iron running the solution. On top of that, we have the software that runs it. So this would be the IaaS, the SQL Server, whatever third-party services that are running, Solar, whatever. And of course, those services in that server need to be configured. So we need security configuration, IaaS website setup, SQL Server setup, all that stuff. So that's the base for any web solution, and of course all the different moving software and hardware parts in the solution. On top of this, we have a number of files that we need to put on the solution. And it really comes down to two parts. One is configuration and another is solution and module files. So remember, this is a solution in the holistic part. So if we look at files, this is all the files that run Sitecore. It's not just the solution specific files, it's all the files. So it's database files, it's Sitecore standard files, it's assemblies, it's C sharp, or not C sharp, well, but ASPXs and MVC, CS, HTML, and things like that. So all the files that make up a running solution. And under that, we need configuration. So this is configuration files. Of course, some of these configuration files is down in the environment configuration, but some of them is very solution specific. Which in terms means that we can split this configuration into three parts. One is general configuration, or one is environment configuration, which is connection strings, things that change depending on whether it's test, UAT, or local development. Another is the roles. So this is the content delivery, content management, SQL Server, publishing server. We'll get back to that as well. And then of course the general configuration, which is the overall changes that apply to all environments and all roles. On top of this, we have the items, and we need to split the items into two. One is content items, and another is configuration items. So configuration items would be, and items, by items I mean the data in the Sitecore database, so Sitecore items. So configuration items is templates, layouts, settings that apply generally to the solution. And on top of this, we have the content that's editor created and managed, and even configuration items that are managed by the editors. We'll get back to why the split up is important. So these are all the moving parts, or the overall moving parts of a Sitecore solution. So if we try to split those up into server roles, so server roles, we have Sitecore content management servers, we have content delivery servers, we might have publishing servers, we might have an Azure deployment server, we might have analytics aggregation servers, which is a 7.5 feature. We have database servers, MongoDB servers, and things like that. So a number of server roles. And of course, there might be server roles that are very solution specific as well. So in a typical standard setup, we'd have a content delivery server, we'd have a content management server, and a database server. So if we look at how the different components of a cycle solution applies to the different server roles, on the delivery server, we'd have environment specific stuff. So of course the virtual machine or the hardware, and then we'd have the operating system, and we'd have some services like the IaaS running on that, and then the configuration of that. So virtual machine, Windows, IaaS, IaaS website, app pool, file securities, things like that. Up here would have a file install. So this would be a complete zip file or whatever, or a complete folder with everything in it. On the content management server, we'd have the equivalent of the CD server, and then of course on top of that we'd have the package install, which is the configuration items, the templates, the layouts, things like that, that we need to apply on the CM server. And then finally on the database server, we would have a SQL server running with the server and configuration of that, SQL security, whatever, and then we'd have a database restore. So we'd have the data coming. So if this is a UAT environment, we'd typically have a backup from production that we want to restore with which has the content from Sitecore. So if we look at processes in the Sitecore application lifecycle, a standard development process typically consists of a number of overall steps. So we'll have the development step, the build step, and the deployment step, and we might have more steps that are not part of this this strategy, like testing and things like that. In the development step, we can split each of these steps or processes into sub-processes. In the development step, we'll have setting up a new development environment. So this is the stuff you do when a new developer comes aboard, or when you start your initial development. Then you need to set up the development environment on the local machine. The next step is the actual development. So this is where you actually change the files and check into version control and do that stuff. Then we need to manage the configuration files. That's part of the development process. So this is maybe more Sitecore centric than most of the other steps. So this is where we have the Sitecore changes, the include files, things like that. Then we need to manage module dependency. We need to make sure that the developers are running on the same version of Sitecore. We need to make sure that they're running on the right version of email marketing or email experience, the email experience platform, and so on. And then of course we need to manage Sitecore configuration. We need to change templates and layouts. We need to make sure that those changes go into version control along with the files that we develop. So on the build side, we need to do daily and nightly builds. We need to put it in testing in QA. We need to just basically do builds on our local machines to see if things work. Then we need to build releases, so release packages, get everything together in order to put it on production. And we need to manage the different releases, so we need to version releases. We need to make sure that UAT and production has that a version is first rolled onto UAT and then onto production. We need to be able to recreate production in our local development machines so that we can do hot fixes if that applies. Then we need to do the deployment, and of course we need to do continuous deployment. So this is the process of actually moving changes from development onto UAT onto production. But we also need to be able to set up completely new servers. So if a server goes goes down, we need to be able to recreate a CD server or a CM server, or even a complete new environment for testing integrations. We also need to manage the actual servers, so we need to manage the hardware or the VMs and the services. We need to manage the Sitecore content, so we need to be able to back up and restore databases from production and put it onto test, so that we can test in a real life scenario. When a new developer comes on board, we need some sort of content that he can run off. And finally, we need to manage environment configurations, so services or environment specific, like connection strings, things like that, in the different environments, across the different environments. The scaling of CDCM servers in production in UAT, but not in local development, for example, is environment specific configuration. So this would be the overall process. So if we look at then how the processes fits together in systems, so processes and components, how we then do that. So in a development environment, we have some processes. We have a build environment, we have a deployment environment. And we'll get back to examples that show you that these environments doesn't necessarily have to be separate physical servers or services or tools. It could just be one simple environment running all three of them, which is quite typical actually. Underneath we have a couple of repositories or databases. One is the version control system, and in the version control system we'll have solution files, we'll have configuration files, we might have items that are versioned, like serialized Sitecore items. We'll have module repositories, so we'll have module files like the Sitecore files, so that could be we'll get back to the systems as well. And of course, each of the modules will have their own configuration. We'll have role configuration and configuration items that apply to these modules. And in the backup repository, we'll have database backups that needs to be restored as part of the development process. We'll have a release repository, so this is where we put the releases before it goes onto the different environments, and where we have the versioning of the different releases. And finally, we will have an environment repository. So we could have VMs, configuration on the servers, and things like that. So any kind of files or assets that allows us to set up a new environment. So if you look at how we can apply different tools in the development environment, we'll typically have Visual Studio. It's a given. We can have things like Slowcheater to handle configuration files. We'll have Sitecore Instance Manager to help set up the local developer machines. We'll have Sitecore Rocks to do some development stuff as well. Then we'll have team development for Sitecore Unicorn, some of these tools that that help us serialize items into version control. In the build environment, we could have Team Foundation Server, Visual Studio Online to help us do the continuous integration. There's also Atlassian Bamboo, TeamCity, Cruise Control, any other CI or continuous integration servers that allows you to do these things. In the deployment environment, we could have tools like Octopus Deploy or Team Foundation Servers Release Management that helps us do deployments onto servers. In the version control system part of things, we could have Visual Studio, Team Foundation Server, Subversion, Git, really any version control system that you want to run off. Module repository, NuGet is a very apparent choice. We could have Sitecore Instance Manager helping us setting up the different modules. There's a really cool download feature in that helps us download and handle the different versions of the different modules. It could also just be a simple network share where we pick up module packages. Backup repository, network share is a good bet. Just putting the databases on a network somewhere. release repositories. Some of the tool like Octopus Deploy uses NuGet to handle the different releases. Team Foundation Server obviously will put the releases in its own repository, and but you could also just keep it in a network share. Environment repository. So if you want to automate and handle this in a nice fashion, you'll run something like Amazon Web Services having VM templates that you can spin off, or Windows Azure. And then of course there's even more advanced tools that sysadmins can use, like Microsoft System Center for managing servers and VMs. And of course, to tie all these tools together, we need to script. So we need to script using a scripting language, or a build language like MS Build or NAND or NAND, and then possibly tying it all together using PowerShell across different environments. So if we look at a very basic Sitecore application lifecycle example, this is typically seen in a lot of places, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it's a sign of a startup process. It's Yeah, it has a number of developers running on their own machines, and then we have a version control system that's hooked up, and some shared database server, and then we'd have deploying to a number of environments. So if we look at the development process, that's typically a pretty manual process. So the developers will just set up their own machines. They will run sim or something like that or Sitecore installers, and install the packages themselves. So it might have a document that says, well, if you want to run on this version, you'll just have to download this version of Sitecore, set it up, set up the IAS, install the packages, and so on. Second part is development, so they'll use Visual Studio and the version control integration, just getting the files in there. Configuration management, you typically use the Sitecore recommended practices of include folders, and just manage files in the version control system. Typically, examples I've seen is just documenting changes across the different environments. So making sure that every time something changes that needs to have different values across different environments, it's documented in a document, or in version control. And then you have module dependency, again, maybe just documented, and using Sitecore Instance Manager to get the right version of the right module. Sitecore configuration is, so this would be the templates and the items and the layouts. So a very typical, very sort of low level way is to run off this shared database server, so that all template changes and layouts is instantly available to all developers. In that sense, you don't need the serialization step. So this is a very typical setup for a very immature, I would say, client. We'll get back to, or a typical development process. Very simple. So the continuous build step would be running on the local machines. So if we want to do continuous build and we want to show something, we just build it on our own machine. The project manager will come over and we'll check it together. You might just run a simple deploy onto a test machine or a third developer, the same type of machine as the developer running, just to get it into a quick test. A release build would be again on the local machine, so they just create a zip archive of the solution file and configuration, and just create packages from the shared database server, maybe documenting what changes are made on Sitecore, so that we make sure that all the items come into a version. Then the releases will just be manually tracked, documented. We might put the zip file in a network share, just to make sure that there's different versions there. So the continuous deployment will be a manual. So we'll deploy them via the zip archives. So we'll typically maybe only do partial deploys, maybe only change some files sometimes. And then we'd install the item packages into Sitecore. Um, and then of course maybe even edit the configuration files manually from the documentation that we've done in the development process. So that's where we keep the CDCM configuration changes and things like that. Initial deploys will have database backups on the file system somewhere, so we can initially set up a new environment with a database backup from another and from production or UAT. We'll just create file archives, build releases with the complete website structure in them, and install them manually, set up the config files and the environment setup. So the actual servers will be typically managed in the integration environments. Test servers will be managed by the developers. And then in the UAT and production servers, we'll have sysadmins running that. And typically it's a totally decoupled process. The Sitecore content will be just done manually. There might be a request change going through onto the sysadmins for a backup, and the files will be available via FTP. It's not going to be necessarily any content version or anything. And again, the actual configuration of the services like IAS and things like that is typically done manually by the developers, so these are the sysadmins. So this setup is seen a lot, and it's a very basic, straightforward setup. It's not necessarily a bad setup. It just has a lot of manual steps and it has a lot of manual processes, and it has a lot of room for optimization. So as I said initially, the key to moving forward and making or improving this process is not necessarily improving the whole thing or improving the most complex ones. It's about finding the places that are most easy to optimize and gives the most result. So if we look at the more advanced Sitecore application lifecycle example, we'll have a number of developers. They will run off their local database servers. So each developer will have their own databases. We'll have a version control system in place, of course. We might have a module repository and a backup repository. And then we'd have a build server, so a CI server and a release repository. So the build server will then create builds onto release repository that are picked up by a deployment server, and the deployment server will be able to pick up complete environments from an environment repository and actually spin up and deploy environments automatically. So again, if we go through the processes, so the setting up a new development environment will be fully automated. So running scripts will set up a new developer machine within minutes, pulling down databases and dependency from the module repository and the backup repository. Development will be just development, so we'll have a number of tools that fit into Visual Studio and use the integrated version control system. The configuration will not be very different from the other one. We'll use app config include files, but there's a number of tools that help automate this, such as XML transforms from Microsoft or Slowcheetah, or even TDS has some tools for doing this. And then of course automating the configuration so that when a new environment is spin up, the correct config files are then copied or enabled on that environment. Module dependencies, all automated, so we need to clearly mark the whatever dependencies and version the dependencies based on or in what's called a manifest. So the solution will have a manifest describing what modules are used in a given version. So if we upgrade Sitecore in version 2 of the solution, then version 1 will still be able to recreate version 1 because we know specifically what version of Sitecore and what version of the different modules that are used, and we can script that so we can set up version 1, version 2, version 3 from the actual manifest, complete with Sitecore and everything. So we need a clear separation of what's in the solution, we need a clear separation of what's in Sitecore and what's in the different modules, and the entire installation and configuration of all the modules are scripted. And then of course Sitecore configuration, so items and templates and layouts are all serialized. We need to version them, of course, to be able to recreate the database uh, or the Sitecore configuration from any version or any branch. Continuous build process is running on the CI server, so it will have integration to the version control system. So every time someone checks in, there's a continuous build. We could hook him with continuous testing and integration testing and unit testing, and of course notifications so that broken builds, the developers gets notified of broken builds. Continuous builds could be deployed onto a test server to be instantly testable by the testers or QA and product owners. Release builds are also handled on the CI server, so the developers are not manually handling any of the release builds. So every night or whenever we need to release, we push a button and everything is packed and ready to go. And all the releases are then clearly versioned, and we need to and each version is then staged across the different environments. So one package release can be applied to any environment, despite of the specific environment configuration, whether it's one CD server or 5 CD servers, or whether it's test UAT, to be able to clearly mark version 1.1 is this package. So that has to do with discoverability and things like that. Deployment, continuous deploy is release is done through the deployment server. So the deployment server will then supervise the release repository. So every time a new release is ready, it can be pushed onto any environment. So any environment is clearly versioned, so we know what version of any release or what release any environment is running. And all roles and all environments are automatically updated. And there's also rollback. So if a version goes south, we can roll back to the previous version as part of the automated scripts. And of course, initial deploy is the same. We can automate server setup, service setup, database service, server configuration, everything. And every package is not only for continuous deploy, it's also for initial deploys. So the same package can be used, the same version 1.1 can be used to create a complete new version or a complete new environment, or can be used to upgrade from version 1.0 to 1.1. Environment servers are fully automated through tools and scripting. We need to maintain, for this to happen, we need to maintain templates of all servers, virtual machines that can be spun up and down, for example on Azure or AWS, or on a private cloud, of course. Manage content, so we need to version and keep backups in order to set up a new initial environment. We need a database backup of Sitecore content that we can run off, and of course these backups will be automated so that let's say every night there's a backup available from any given version, so we can clearly mark any running version of any environment with the associated editable or editor content. And finally, environment configuration. Everything is automatically created. So IIS settings, everything, security, everything, even modules. So if a new module is installed in a version and that module requires a specific setup of the IIS, then that's automatically transferred onto the environment from the module itself. So what parts handle what? So in the developer, so we'll have on the developer machine, we'll have, in this example, SQL Server, Visual Studio, Slow Cheetah, team development for Sitecore. We'll have a version control system, which could be Git. The module repository could be a network share. Backup repository could be a network share. And everything is tied together using PowerShell scripts. Build server could be TeamCity. TeamCity typically releases to NuGet, which is picked up by Octopus Deploy on the development server. The development server then, using an environment like Windows Azure, we can have the templates and servers in Windows Azure, and Octopus Deploy can then script using PowerShell a new setup of new environments and push releases onto those environments. So these are the different. So in the version control system, we'll have solution files, general configuration files, role configuration, and release configuration. And we'll have configuration items. So we'll have the serialized layouts and templates and things like that from Sitecore. In the module repository, we'll have the module files, so Sitecore files or ECM or Web Forms Marketer files, but we'll also have configuration for and serialized items for these modules, so that developer machines or the environments can be set up straight from the module repository. And then in the backup repository, we'll have Sitecore content. And releases will be managed in the release repository, obviously. In the deployment server on Octopus Deploy, in this example, we'll store environment specific configurations. So these are connection strings, things like that, because Octopus Deploy needs to. So if we set up a new environment in Octopus Deploy will then handle the connection strings. So it won't be part of the versioning in the version control system. It'll be part of Octopus Deploy. So it's really not a development process of handling environments. It's a deployment process. And of course, templates, VMs will be handled by any environment repository, such as Windows Azure. And as I mentioned before, we need some way of tying this all together. So a solution manifest is needed. So we need to store a solution manifest which points to the versions of the modules, which points to whatever Sitecore content, where is the Sitecore content, where is the server configuration, what VMs are we using, things like that. So it describes the solution in an overall manner. And this is picked up by the scripting, so that it allows both the development setup, the deployment setup, and things like that. Yeah, here we go. And of course, tying everything together with PowerShell is essential. In summary, how to get started on Sitecore ALM. We need to understand what a Sitecore solution is and what it consists of. We need to understand the complete application lifecycle before starting. We need to know that one process affects the other processes. So we need to understand all the processes. Like configuration management is a very, very important process of automating deployments, and configuration management is actually done in the development process. So in order to truly do automated deployments, we need to change the development process. We need to focus on automating and optimizing the processes that matter. That's about not going for the complex things, introducing new things. It's about optimizing the small things in your daily work so that you set aside time to do more and more clever automation and optimization. And again, focus on automating the processes that you already do and focus on the frequently repeated processes. Go for that quick win. In Sitecore, in the SBOSS teams of Sitecore, the um, the the business optimization has this experience maturity model. So this talks about how the marketing division can move up the scale of more and more of using the Sitecore um, product in its complete form. Application lifecycle management is really all about maturity as well. So if you want to move up the ladder of maturity and really implement application lifecycle management in its or all the different facets, then you really need to move slowly through the different processes. You need to get that architecture of the solution. You need to understand how the code is written, get the configuration management settled before you start on item serialization, dependency management, continuous integration, all the testing stuff, and then of course going on to things like continuous delivery, automating all the different deployment steps. Because if you aspire to go for the continuous delivery from the very beginning, and you're still struggling with the underlying architecture, then it'll just be too complex to manage, and there'll just be too many problems with the process, like the configuration management and trying to work that out as you strive. So I think the key learning from this is the key thing you should take away is take it step by step. Go for the daily processes, go for the frequently repeated, and once you nail those, move on to the next ones and the next one, and the next ones. So that's it. That's the webcast for today. I hope it's been good. I hope everybody's has some thought on moving forward and maturing their development process. And feel free to contact me for any more information or any talks. Thanks.